From crunching bodies to crunching numbers.
Can you take data and do some predictive work that'll help me draft or trade better?
Old school minds across the league are embracing advanced stats more than ever as internet bloggers are now in NHL boardrooms.
I started a website in 2005 and there were like 15 people reading it.
As puck possession becomes more crucial in today's game, so does the need to track it.
Collectively within your group and your team, you have to drive possession.
We'll examine how hockey metrics have the ability to give teams an advantage on the ice.
We're not trying to reinvent it or do anything different. We're just trying to figure out a way that we can better analyze and make the sport better.
It takes a shift in thinking, but it is the way of the future. And the future is now. Welcome to the Hockey Central studio and our special A Numbers Game. Jeff Merrick alongside Damien Cox. And Damien, perhaps the best term we can use for what we'll be discussing over the next 30 minutes is Sportuguese. Fancy names for fancy stats. There's a new way of thinking around hockey in the NHL, Damien, and teams are finally starting to pay attention.
Well, after decades of being able to describe the game and talk about what we think we see, there's been a search for a long time, I think, for a way to quantify what it is, to be able to relate it in a different way. And I think that's what we're starting to see more of. And are people slowly coming around to a new way of thinking? Maybe it's slow, but as one person said to me once, smart people change their minds. And there's a lot of people changing their minds in hockey right now.
You know, we're going to talk a lot about what's happening right now, what's going to be happening in the future. But how about some historical context here, Damien? We found one of the NHL's original game sheets. Okay, this comes back from 1922. It's when you broke in covering the St. Pats. This is December 16th, a 7-2 final St. Pats over the Canadiens. And look up top for official scores. Be particular to give credits for assists. So going back to 1922, assists were considered a fancy stat or an analytic in the NHL.
Well, I do remember Babe Dye getting those 5 goals that night. Big win for them. But yeah, I mean, and that's when the game was really changing. I mean, you're going from the rover to, you know, the forward pass, and things were changing dramatically. So statistics really weren't seen to be a big part of the game, and now they are.
And now they are indeed. But here comes the question. We know that there's a stats revolution happening. We know there's new ways of thinking around the NHL. But the question is everybody embracing it? Have a look.
Analytics don't really help.
Possession and points in the standings are directly correlated.
I think you got to watch the games and not so much look at the stats.
If you're going to win a Stanley Cup, no one really cares what your statistics were like.
Hey, we've got this data, it shows interesting stuff. It's not always just the guy with the most character and heart, and maybe there's other things we need to worry about.
It's the hottest debate in hockey.
Analytics, a lot of talk this summer.
Hate it.
Yeah.
Being a sport that has long celebrated characteristics like heart, grit, toughness, the use of advanced statistics in hockey has very much become a polarizing issue. However, as teams search for a competitive advantage, the movement towards analytics has begun to gain steam. As you might expect, it has not been without its skeptics.
It's something that obviously is a lot more prevalent now in the game, but it's something I always kind of go back to. You got to play the game. Such a reactionary sport that no shift is ever the same.
It's something I don't know much about, but it's hard to believe you can quantify some of those intangibles.
The summer of 2014 has been one of great progress for the use of advanced stats in hockey, highlighted by several key hirings. The Maple Leafs created the biggest buzz when they brought in 28-year-old Kyle Dubas to be their assistant general manager. Dubas is well-versed in analytics, having utilized them while he was GM of the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds of the OHL. He is not bothered by criticism of those methods.
The critics really don't bother me at all. And the way that I look at it is that if you don't want it to have any critics, you can do things the same way they've always been done, and that'll probably give you a good chance of being average or mediocre. And if you want to have success, you look at all the successful teams in sports across all sports of late, they've all had their own identity.
The Edmonton Oilers also made waves when they brought Tyler Dellow into the fold.
The Toronto-based lawyer has become a leader in the advanced stats world, and he believes this summer is just the beginning.
To me, it's gotten bigger every year. Like, you have to remember, I started a website in 2005, and there were like 15 people reading it. And so for me, every year I'm kind of like, wow, this is a pretty big year for this stuff. And so I think it's been building, but yeah, this year has been bigger than any before, and I expect it'll continue to grow through the next few years as more data becomes available.
With where we're at in hockey today, it's very primitive, it's very basic stuff. There's nothing advanced or sabermetric about what we're doing in hockey right now. Is the goal to get there? I don't know. The goal is to figure out whether that stuff has any good uses in hockey that can help us.
Another common critique of analytics is that metrics cannot capture the intricacies of such a fluid sport as hockey. However, those who have studied the numbers like Dubas and Dello are quick to respond to that notion.
My retort is that it works pretty good in basketball and soccer, which are, especially soccer is a pretty similar sport to hockey by and large. I mean, take the playing surface and the load of mobility out of it, and you've got pretty similar sport, bigger playing surface, more players, but offside is involved, same progression of the ball or puck. There's a lot of similarities there.
For me, when you look at the fact that there's other fluid sports out there that are finding ways to apply data to the game, I just think that the criticism doesn't hold any water. There hasn't been a sport that has said, well, we've taken a good faith look at data and it hasn't shown us anything.
If you can tell me what you're talking about or a different section of the game that you want to learn about, we can probably do some deeper analysis on it. I think that applies to every sport and every aspect of life.
So, Damien, whether it's the Toronto Maple Leafs or whether it's the Edmonton Oilers, whether it's the New Jersey Devils who have their own department as well, the Florida Panthers have one, we just went through what we kind of like to call the summer of analytics. Why now? Why 2014?
Well, look, I think the NHL is more competitive, or as competitive now as it's ever been. So I think everybody's looking for an edge. You've got 30 teams. Many of them haven't won in a long time. They're looking for an edge. They hear things and say, maybe we should be investigating that. But I think it is an interesting question. This isn't brand new. This has been going on for a while. Teams have been using this for a while. Why have teams been so resistant to it? I think part of that, Jeff, is that the sport, to me, is a conservative sport in a lot of ways. A lot of the thinking in this sport, and it really takes a change, and often group change, for a lot of people to want to change at all.
And one of those teams that, at least publicly, were very resistant to the analytics movement were the Toronto Maple Leafs, and they almost became a test market team a couple of seasons ago.
Well, I think you've got the most scrutinized team in hockey, and all of a sudden people can look at them and say, aha, this happened and the numbers proved why this happened. People will stand up and take notice. When things happen to the Maple Leafs, whether you're a Leaf fan or whether you're not, people start to take notice. And when people look at the way they collapsed last season and how many people out there who are key into or very much into analytics said this is going to happen, I think that was a convincing piece of evidence for a lot of people.
The stat was always their PDO is too high, the save percentage is too high, the shooting percentage is too high. That's going to come down, and the Maple Leafs will come crashing down to earth. And last season they did. Some key terms as well we should throw your way before we proceed any further. Some terms you're going to hear on this program and throughout our entire broadcast schedule this season. Corsi, you're probably familiar with this one already. This is shots plus missed shots plus block shots, only 5-on-5. The Corsi relative, a little more intricate. That is Corsi for the player, minus Corsi for the team when the player is not on the ice. Again, 5-on-5. Fenwick, a variation of Corsi. That's shots plus missed shots. PDO, shooting percentage plus save percentage while on the ice. And points per 60, that's pretty self-explanatory. Points per 60 minutes of ice time. So if once upon a time the story was the Toronto Maple Leafs and the regression back to earth and not making the playoffs, could we say the Colorado Avalanche are that battleground team this year?
Well, I think they're one of the teams that a lot of people are going to be looking at, and how statistically their story changes and how maybe it doesn't change at all. But when you look at Colorado in a lot of ways, their time of possession and the way they possess the puck should have resulted in a losing record. Instead, they had a tremendous season. A lot of it was about goaltending. And that's where, and we chat about this, would the Maple Leafs, even with their horrible Corsi numbers, if their goaltender hadn't got hurt, would they have made the playoffs? That's the debate. And I think a key part of all of these hockey analytics, it's not about whether you have to choose one camp or the other. You've got to figure out a way to marry what people have used for decades with what people are saying now. I think that's what teams are trying to figure out. Okay, we've got numbers, but how can we use that with what we were using before and how do you weight it? And that's the challenge for all these teams.
And you know what? Every season there's one team, maybe two teams that, to your point, Damien, the stats just don't look favorably upon, but they're a successful team, and they become that battleground squad. And funny with those squads as well, they tend to say the same thing. We finally have this all figured out, and then the next season arrives, and maybe this year it'll be the Colorado Avalanche, or maybe even the Anaheim Ducks. Some websites have passed your way as well. If you want to follow all these fancy stats, these analytics, stats.hockeyanalysis.com is one. Behind the Net, that's Gabe Desjardins' stat, behindthenet.ca. Desjardins very much at the forefront of this entire movement. Nicetimeonice.com is one to follow along. Some kind of ninja.com/NHL. Sportingcharts.com/NHL/icetrack. Another one to keep you abreast of everything happening in the sports analytics community. Still to come on A Numbers Game. He may have been called Captain Video, but Roger Neilson could also be the godfather of advanced stats. We sit down with Nielsen's assistant Ron Smith to discuss what may have been the beginning of hockey analytics. And we've seen it in NASCAR, soccer, and tennis. Now could player tracking be on its way in the NHL?
And here at Honeywell, we witnessed a computerized attempt at forecasting the finish of the upcoming season. Pages and pages of information. Everything from complete scoring records, rookie performances, to age factors, penalties, injury records, and on and on. This data was sent here to Toronto, where it was put on computer cards by key punch operators. Next, various sequences were run using different forecast programs, correlating, examining, and analyzing the data from several points of view. And finally, the results were flashed out on this visual information projector.
You know, I really shouldn't laugh. I can imagine 50 years from now, people watching this special and laughing about me and Damien talking about Corsi and Fenwick and PDO and these primitive ways to judge the game. Welcome back to the show. You know, when you talk about innovation and you talk about education and ways to dissect the game and genius as well, the conversation quickly turns to Roger Neilson. Perhaps nobody forced changes in the rulebook more than Roger. We know him as Captain Video, but he was also tracking players, keeping advanced stats, if you will, long before it became a craze in the NHL this summer. But he didn't do it alone. He had help from a right-hand man by the name of Ron Smith.
Contrary to popular belief, the NHL's recent analytics movement is not a revolutionary idea. In fact, the roots of today's advanced stats craze can be traced back to the 1970s. That's when Roger Neilson and Ron Smith, two lifelong hockey men, teamed up to set the ball in motion for a new way of thinking.
I started at the coaching program in '72, and Roger was a big part of doing clinics and stuff for us. So I right away got exposed to his thinking, and it was clearly different than was prevalent in the game.
Neilson was a known hockey innovator, most notably for his extensive use of game film. That practice earned him the nickname Captain Video. He brought Smith aboard as an assistant coach, and the two developed their own version of advanced stats, tracking unique data and seeking to find information beyond what was available on the game sheet.
The key stat we got was chances to score. Everybody uses that now, a legitimate chance to score, how it happened, who caused it, both for and against, and what kind was it? Was it a rush chance? Was it a forechecking? Was it a power play? Whatever. The name of the game is scoring goals and preventing them, and so why not evaluate, what you do to score goals and what you do to prevent goals, and break it down into some usable thing. So we did. We saw that the rush was by far the highest number of scoring chances that were created, and your defensive zone game could break down in a number of ways. You could have a missed check, you could have poor positioning, you could have a giveaway, you could have an outfought, that kind of thing. So over a period of time, you knew just what every player in your team was doing and what your team's strengths and weaknesses were statistically.
In today's NHL players make up the largest group of skeptics to the new wave of analytics. And detractors to this new wave of thinking are certainly not shy about making their voices heard. Smith's experience in the early days of advanced stats was a little different.
We posted the report after a game the next morning, and there was a rush to look at it eventually. Now, what was said in the dressing room after that by the players, I don't know. Never heard any really vocal differences. I can guess that a couple of players might have been the leaders in that, but Sittler and the top guys were so supportive that it was accepted. But I think either that year or the next year we didn't post it anymore. We only kept it internally and dealt with the players one-on-one and said, here's your report card type thing, and we had ratings and so on and comments about the players' performance. So it kind of backed up any verbal discussion we had with the players. And it's hard to argue stats. If you saw the guy had 10 giveaways that caused goals, that's a problem. So fix it.
Whether it's new statistics, technology, or coaching techniques, hockey has historically been resistant to change. The theory that such a random, fast-paced sport can't be boiled down to numbers is an argument you hear from opponents of analytics.
I've felt always that people look at hockey as being unteachable in terms of such a free-flowing game, and there's such instinct involved, game sense, and so on and so on. And that obviously wasn't true, but it was basically a hockey mantra for a long time. And just let them play, and they'll figure it out. And you can't do drills that are going to teach you how to play better and smarter. And it was something that you were born with almost. Well, maybe Gretzky was, but the rest of us weren't.
What do you think Roger would think about all the numbers and all the analysis and all the stats that are coming out now?
I think he'd be good at it. I think he would probably siphon out what would be good for him and so on. He liked a precision game. And the game today has to be precision, or you're not going to win. It's not a freewheeling, scrambly, ad-lib game. So I think he would like that part of it.
So basically, Damien, then, if Roger Nilsson were alive today, we wouldn't be calling him Captain Video, we'd be calling him Captain Corsi. Is that the theme of the piece in some respects?
Or Lieutenant Fenwick or something like that. I don't know. I think Captain Video was certainly a catchy name of the time. And it's amazing, people use that term as an insulting way. And that's what people thought of Roger Nilsson's way of looking at the game. But to me, you had an old-style coach in Ron Smith embracing new-style numbers. But also at the time, his point was this: you can give me a lot of numbers as a coach, but what do I do with them? And that, to me, is the next stage of this conversation. We hear people talking about it all the time. Okay, the numbers are compelling. What does a hockey team, what does a coach do with those numbers to get his players to do certain things and win hockey games? And that's where we're headed next.
Yeah, and there's probably two things that advanced stats can do. They can prove assumptions that have been long held, or they can reveal new truths. Now, when it comes to the stars in the NHL, the megastars, the superstars, the 6- and 8-time All-Star players, how does some of their analytics measure up, and are there any surprises in there?
Well, like a lot of things we talk about, it depends what you want to look at. Now look at these three players. I think these are prominent players in the National Hockey League today. Sidney Crosby, Jonathan Toews, Patrice Bergeron. You look at Corsi, and if you believe Corsi is the number that you really have to care about, well, Sidney Crosby's isn't anywhere near as good as Jonathan Toews or as Patrice Bergeron. So does that mean that Bergeron, not Crosby, is the best player in the NHL? I don't know, because look at Corsi relative, it changes. And then look at points per 60 minutes of play, and Crosby looks pretty darn good again. So whether you're talking size, belligerence, stick handling versus how hard you shoot the puck, all these other factors, it really depends what matters to you the most and how you scale these things against each other.
So then when you break it down specifically with Patrice Bergeron, do we now finally say, when you look at the numbers, that David Krejci isn't the number one center on the Boston Bruins? It really is Patrice Bergeron, who makes everyone around him better.
Well, and that may be the case, but it's also what Claude Julien wants you to believe, or what he wants to use. And again, it goes back to what Ron Smith. Take that information. Who am I going to play him with? Does he make other players better? There are stats out there that now measure how does Zdeno Chara play when Patrice Bergeron's on the ice and when he's not? And that's the kind of stuff that coaches are going to have to sift through when it comes to deciding how they're going to use their lineup.
People that follow the analytics closely, the fancy stats, love the Los Angeles Kings, and they are defending Stanley Cup champions. But when you dig behind the numbers of the LA Kings, there is some journalism out there that says, well, a player like Jake Muzzin, for example, Drew Doughty's partner, he's riding the coattails of someone like Drew Doughty. But when you get into the numbers and you get into the stats, the effect is actually the reverse. Now, it might be a small sample size because of Jake Muzzin's time in the NHL, but so far it seems as if Muzzin, by way of possession, actually makes Drew Doughty a better hockey player, and all the way down the line, Jake Muzzin makes everyone on that LA Kings defense a much better player, Damien.
A little counterintuitive, and certainly something that Jake Muzzin, when it comes to contract time, I think, will want to bring up. But that's why I also think the NHL Players Association, to some degree, and players are resistant to what this stuff may mean to them, because it could turn a lot of value of players, contracts, and all those things right on their head. Is all of a sudden Jake Muzzin more important than Drew Doughty? I don't think that's what you're saying, but I think you're saying he may be more valuable than you think.
The only problem with that for the players, you still can't use these numbers in arbitration. And you'd be sure that if
Not
you're
yet.
Jake Muzzin's agent, you want that when you walk into the arbitration room. Coming up after the break, we've touched on the past and present. Now, what does the future hold? Player tracking isn't in the NHL yet, but it may be here sooner than we think. Stay tuned.
We're at the very primitive stages of hockey, deep hockey analysis.
As we get better in terms of putting a price on a shot, in terms of how dangerous it is, we'll be able to refine our model.
But hockey's a lot further behind where baseball is. There's a real push for people to consider this stuff to be super advanced.
What I expect will happen is that it's going to be refined a lot. Teams are going to be able to come up with a better model, a better framework of understanding what's happening and why it has value or not.
We look back even in 5 years or 3 years, let alone a decade from now, and we'll look back and say, like, what were we even arguing about here?
Well, the future of analytics is already here. The use of radio frequency tracking and camera tracking has been used in soccer and basketball already, and now it's being tested in the NHL. Quantum Pro Hockey was in Traverse City, Michigan for an NHL Prospects tournament. They applied an RFID sticker on a player's shin pad that communicated with sensors in the boards to track on-ice time, number of shifts, and average time of shift for the tournament. So far, the technology has primarily been used in Europe, but this was very much a showcase for the NHL. Okay, Damien, crystal ball time. The future of analytics in the NHL. Please share.
I have no idea. And you know what? The best part is even guys like Kyle Dubas and what he was saying, he doesn't really know what's going to happen. What we do know is what we're using now, Corsi and Fenwick, and they've been really interesting things to work with for a couple of years. They're going to look like, I don't know, cave drawings soon, because we're going to have a lot more information to use, and the statistics are going to be used. I'm not sure everybody's going to love it. I'm not sure everybody's going to want all the information they're going to get, but it's coming, and you can't stop it.
And for hardcores, they certainly will love it. Goalies, perhaps that might be the next frontier. By the way, we will be using analytics on all of our broadcasts, specifically Wednesday and Saturday night. You can still watch the games and enjoy them as always, but if you look at the game as a riddle, then maybe analytics is for you.